House tax will come to order. Will the secretary please take the roll?
Vice Chair Beard.
Here.
Vice Chair Zach Brown.
Excused.
Representative Abbott.
Excused.
Representative Dunwell.
Here.
Representative Fern.
Excused.
Representative Fuller.
Here.
Representative Kerr Carpenter.
Here.
Representative Galt.
Here.
Representative Hertz.
Excused.
Representative Kastmeyer.
Here.
Representative Rhonda Knudsen.
Here.
Representative Marler.
Here.
Representative Sheldon Galloway.
Here.
Representative Smith.
Here.
Representative Welch.
Here.
Representative White.
Here.
Representative Zolnikov.
Here.
Chair Redfield.
Here. We'll get started. Before we start, I got to say, if for those of you that had the bill yesterday, if you would need a folder for that, we have some available.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we really don't. I just got it scattered all over my office now. First off, we will have a presentation by Mr. Schaefer from LFD to talk about the revenue estimate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Sam Schaefer, Fiscal Division. I will, with your permission, hand these out real quick.
Go ahead.
And while you're passing those out, I will say that in 2 weeks, we will have a revenue update as far as a forecast update. That's the plan. And we did one last month, and we did email it out, and it is on our website. And while I won't go over that report because we'll do a new one in 2 weeks, and then if we want to start going over that report, summary of it, over the 3 years, the estimate that our office is forecasting, HJ2 is still the official HJ2, but it has decreased by about 0.8% over the 3 years. That's, percentage-wise, not a ton, but it's about $60 million. So, the appropriation committees, Amy Carlson, our director, has been telling them this is where we're at. Typically, there is another revenue estimate in March, so that's obviously up to the legislative body, but that's kind of where we're at, and then we will do another one in February. The key components that caused the decrease were new IHS assumptions. Obviously, that's not obviously if you don't know, the economic firm that we get our economic data from. They're forecasting a little slower wage growth in the state. Obviously, we've seen, the decrease in oil prices compared to November, no surprise there. And then overall gross domestic product, those estimates have been revised downward. So just a heads up, 0.8% over the 3 years decrease, that's about $58 million. And then, in 2 weeks, we will have an updated forecast again. And if this committee would like me to come present that at the end of the month, I would be more than happy to. So
I'll request that right now.
Yeah, great, we can do that. So that is the quick abbreviated forecast estimate. But now let's look at the actual collections year to date. This is money in the bank revenue update. Long story short, ongoing revenue were 2.2% above where we were last year. The anticipated growth rate was 3.4%. So let's just walk through this quick table again. I will remind everyone how it works. Page 2, we have our major general fund tax types. Bottom right-hand corner, we have the total year-to-date growth. Notice that is negative 1.1%. That is because in last year's collections, there were $65 million of one-time only transfers that were authorized in the special session. What's really important to look at is the ongoing growth, which is that 2.2% above last year. Okay, that's bottom right-hand corner, second row from the bottom. And then you can see HJ2, if you move to the left, was 3.4%. So we're about 1.2% below where we anticipated. And I will go over, the top 7 sources and then any other questions you may have. And you can see exactly where that year-to-date difference is occurring. Feel free to interrupt if you have questions. So page 3, we've seen this pie chart before. This is general fund revenue. Yes, question?
Representative Dunwell.
Mr. Chair, You elaborated on earlier. I mean, you gave us some bullet points that we're seeing slower wage growth, decreased oil production, and pricing, $58 million. So could you elaborate as to why we anticipated 3.4% and it's now at 2.2%? Why? Why?
Representative or Chair Redfield, Representative Dunwell. What I talked about earlier, that is the model that our office produces in-house, and that is the forecast that we continually monitor. This 2.2% is collections year to date. So the 58 million I talked about, that's our forecast. This document is what we've collected thus far. So I'm just saying, giving you a heads up that when we update the forecast maybe in March, if the legislature chooses to, our forecast from our office might be a little bit lower than what it was back in November and what is an HJ2, whereas this is showing money in the bank right now. So, yeah.
Representative,
please.
Follow up.
So, Mr. Shepherd, right. Thanks for that explanation. I guess I maybe didn't make myself clear. So why the difference, the money in the bank now is 2.2%, and we anticipated 3.4%? If we don't know, we don't know. I'm just saying.
Oh, no, Chair Redfield, Representative Dunwell. In 2 seconds, I can answer that. Yeah. The majority of it is individual income tax. Individual income tax was forecasted to be 4.7%. Year-to-date change is 1%. The reason right now for that is that estimated payments last year, individual income tax estimated payments in December and January were extremely high. And, I would venture to say that a lot of that was taxpayer behavior, people trying to take advantage of the federal tax reform. The December and January of this year was more normal, more what we would typically expect. So there did appear to be, how much of it was one time only, how much of it is maybe ongoing. There was a bump in last year's January, December, yep. And as we move forward, that one time only bump in those 2 months will play less of a role as we get more collections. Yep.
Representative Sheldon Galloway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am curious if this is sent to the governor's office and if it was part of his formula for the budget that he gave to us to look at.
Chair Redfield, Representative Sheldon Galloway. The HJ2 estimate is adopted by the legislature, so the governor's proposal is based on their office's revenue projections. Just to refresh your memory, when we came in November, their estimate and our estimate were the closest I've ever seen it. They were practically indistinguishable. So when in his proposal, he was using similar revenues to what we were providing the legislature. Okay. So page 3, here's what's happened in individual income tax up until this point. You can see that table. Withholding, that's the taxes that are withheld from your paycheck. We continue to see strong growth there, and, that's a good thing. Withholding is about 2/3 of individual income tax collections. And if income tax collections are a little over half of total collections, as you can see in the pie chart, that means that withholding is going to make up about 1/3 of total general fund collections. So it's encouraging to see that growth of 6.7%. But then you can see, where did the drop really occur? Estimated payments, and up until November we had growth there, but then after December and January, if you turn the page, in the middle of the page on page 4, you can see December and January, December payments in yellow, January payments in blue, last year in 2018 were extremely high. Typically we hover in that low to mid 70 range. Last year we were at 105. And this year we're at 67. So that is a product probably to a certain extent of, people shifting money around from one tax year to the next to take advantage of federal tax reform. And then you can see traditionally, like I said, we're about mid to low to mid 70s. We're still a little bit under that, but it's not like we absolutely tanked compared to where we usually were. It's just that last year was so high in January and December. So I would say right now, why are we at 2.2 instead of 3.4? The middle of page 4, that summarizes it. You can see up above, though, we have had this strong withholding growth, and typically by January, you can see it kind of evens out. So where you are in January is pretty indicative of where you end up in June. So if we stayed at, 6.5, 6.7% for the rest of the year, that would suggest that, withholding growth is strong, and that would maybe help to boost any decline we have in estimated payments. We have quarterly estimated payments, but we have withholding every month. So, if withholding stays at 6.7, that gap between the 2.2 and the 3.4 is likely going to get smaller. Okay, next source, property tax. Once again, if there's questions at any time, interrupt me. Growth in property tax, 8.9 million or 5.8%. We're above last year. We anticipated 2.5% in HJ2, and I don't do this source, but from talking to Nick Van Brown, long story short, the protested property taxes in HJ2, the assumption that was actually greater than what has materialized thus far. And then non-levy revenue, it's probably due to higher than expected coal non-levy revenue is higher than what was anticipated in HJ2. Property tax, when all is said and done, it's going to come in really close to HJ2 because we have the taxable value. So if people pay their property tax, we know what the property tax collections are going to be. And in HJ2, that was 5.8% year to date. We're at, like I said, where are we right now? Or pardon me, in HJ2, we thought it would grow by 2.5%. We're at 5.8%. When all is said and done, it's probably going to be close to 2.5%. Okay, corporation tax. Even though we're slightly below, pardon me, last year by 1.5 million or 1.5%, we're higher than the anticipated collections in HJ2. This source was projected to slightly decrease by 3.8% off the very high fiscal year 2018 collections. And year to date, it's only down 1.5%. So even though we're below last year's collections, we actually are collecting more than we budgeted for. And why exactly is Corp where it's at? Top of page 5, you can see we have the accounting tables for corporation tax. The first line, that corporation tax, that is essentially taxes that are owed. So you make your estimated payments. A corporation makes quarterly estimated payments, and then if there's an additional amount that they might owe on top of that, maybe they made more than they expected, that's that corporation tax line. We're up 21.9%, 2.6 million in those current year payments on the year. What's extremely encouraging is the estimated payments are at 9.3% growth. And ultimately, the estimated payments that a corporation makes, that's like 80% of the total collections when all is said and done. So that's the key driver. We're at 9.3% growth there. So why are we down year to date by 1.5%? Well, last year in December, if you recall, there was a very large audit in an amount that we don't usually see. You can see the audit line at the bottom. Last year at this point, we had collected $21.2 million. We're at 8.5 million right now. So if the estimated payments continue to grow in that 8 or 9% range and the corporation tax continues to do well, this is probably going to end up a little bit above last year because that one-time audit will have less and less weight in the year-to-date comparison as we move forward now, if that makes sense. You can see the first 2 quarters average is this black line of the estimated payments historically. You can see there the first 2 quarters, they're the highest they've been in a decade. So that's encouraging. This is a source, like I said, that's typically pretty volatile. I think it's going to come in above HJ2. Like I said, in HJ2, it was expected to decline by 3.8% off a very strong year last year. I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if we actually had year-to-date growth. Unless there's another big one-time audit or estimated payments fall out the bottom, then this is probably going to have some growth compared to last year. All right, a less boring source. Vehicle taxes and fees, 200,000 above last year. That's 0.4% growth. It was expected to grow by 1.8%. This kind of waxes and wanes from one month to the other. The accounting system, like last month we were showing like 4% growth. Now we're down to 0.4%. It's just timing of when the vehicle registrations are posted into the system. It's going to come in close to HJ2. It usually does. Okay, oil and natural gas. We have a payment in the bank. If you recall, last time I said we're constantly collecting tax collections, cash, the Department of Revenue, when I say we, starting in July from oil production tax, but then the department needs to go collect the taxes when they're due, and then allocate oil and natural gas distributions out to the various local governments or state special revenue accounts. That's why we have this 6-month lag on when we get our first payment. We have got our first payment, and we're at 30.9% growth compared to last year. The dollar amount there, $15.8 million in the first quarter payment, compared to last year's of $12.1 million. No surprise, this is a tax source that is taxed on its production value. July, August, September, we were hovering near, $70 West Texas Intermediate price. That was much higher than what was a year ago. So, this was not, it's good growth. It wasn't surprising that it was this high. Obviously, we know oil prices have kind of come back down to earth. It seems that they've kind of found that bottom of 50. It hasn't really went below 50. It's sitting at about maybe $54, $55. But you can actually see on this graph, the rigs are in black historically, and then the orange line is the production we're at year to date, or pardon me, the daily production. And you can see we had this decline here for multiple years as oil went from 100 a barrel down to 30 a barrel. But with the prices rebounding, Montana actually saw as many as 4 rigs operating in the state. And, we actually have seen a production increase, this fiscal year. So, some growth there after 2.5 years of decline on the production side. Prices are kind of leveling out. Ultimately, this is a source that's probably going to end up, right around where we thought in HJ2. However, in the out years, we have reduced that estimate in our forecast, and you'll see that in 2 weeks because IHS has updated their oil prices for the entire biennium. So we'll see a decrease there. Once again, not surprising. If the oil prices are lower than what we thought in November, our forecast is going to match those decreases. Top of page 6, you can see, this increase in both the Montana and WTI oil price. One's in green, one's in yellow. And then, the last month, starting in November, you can see the decline in prices. Insurance tax, we thought it would grow by 2.9%. We're at 3.5% right now, so that's pretty consistent with the estimate. And then finally, video gaming tax. Strong growth here, and I'll make this comment. We had 4 straight years where it was exactly 60 million. So this year I said it'll be 60 million. Now we're seeing growth, but that's just how it goes. We're going to probably come in maybe 6% above HJ2 because I assumed 0 growth there. So those are the top 7 sources. You can see coal severance tax there, so I will make a comment on that. Everyone's probably heard at some point that there is a contract dispute between Westmoreland, who owns the Rosebud mine, which feeds the coal strip plant. We are going to have an update, hopefully in the next estimate, on what we think the impact could be if not units 3 and 4, if the whole plant were to essentially shut down. What is the fiscal impact to the state, both, general fund and state special revenue and local tax collections? We did post on our website a few years ago. I was requested to do an analysis on the impact of units 1 and 2 closing. And I can just, spoiler alert, general fund revenue I estimated would take about a $7 million hit a year, and then general fund plus state special plus local taxes would be in the vicinity of about a total of $17 million a year. That's just units 1 and 2, which makes up about a third of the total electrical generation capacity at the entire plant. So if the whole plant went down, you would essentially multiply those by 3. So, we'll have an official number, but I'll give you a sneak preview. We're probably going to say the general fund impact's 21 million, and the statewide impact's about 51 million, but we'll have an official number, hopefully, with our next update. And this is all, I don't know what's going to happen. There's going to be a judge order at the end of this month. We'll see what happens. But that's kind of the numbers we're looking at if the whole plant went down. Once again, that is not an official estimate. That's just kind of where I'm at now. But soon we will probably have a document, and an update on the total impact if that did happen. So I threw that in there. You can see the study online. If you want it, I can email you a link, and that was just for units 1 and 2. We go by each source where we think it would hit. Obviously, coal severance tax, individual income tax, mining taxes, electrical generation tax, transmission tax, all these things, property tax would take a hit, and you can, if you want to, see exactly how we came up with those numbers. So, questions if you have them, and that's what I've got today.
Representative Dunwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Shepherd, so if units 1 and 2 went down, what's the timetable you're looking at, like now?
So right now, units 1 and 2 are scheduled to go down in 2022, and I'm not going to venture to say if it'll be sooner or later than that. That is law right now. There was a legal agreement that they would go down by 2022. So if that were the case, the study we did thought 7 million general fund, 17 million statewide for just 1 and 2. And I'm not going to guess on what's going to happen at the court level.
Speaker Hertz.
Mr. Chair, Sam, when we look at coal strip and your proposal or estimates on taxes, I assume those are taxes that are directly related to coal strip. Are you looking at any indirect taxes like employees' wages, other auxiliary services that people might be working with the plant, and how that might impact Montana?
Chair Redfield, Speaker Hertz, those were direct fiscal impacts. We've always cautioned, and I think the legislature has asked us to kind of steer away from dynamic fiscal notes because there would be spinoff associated, but what we're going to stick with is direct taxes paid. So jobs at the plant or the mine would be included in this estimate, but anything else, auxiliary services, like you said, nope. Direct fiscal impacts to direct tax sources.
Representative Knudsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 3, the individual income tax chart, just a quick question. Withholdings is up, the difference is 6.7%. Could that be attributed to more people working?
Chair Redfield, Representative Knudsen. Sure, yeah, this withholding is not exactly wages, but there is some correlation there because obviously sometimes people may over withhold because they have another source of income they don't want to have to pay up in April. But definitely, yeah, if more people are working compared to last year, I would expect withholding growth to be high. Yep.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Sheldon Galloway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On property tax, when we've gone from a 7-year assessment to 2-year assessment, how has that affected your predictions, and could that be part of growth?
Chair Redfield and Representative Sheldon Galloway, and I don't forecast the property tax, but I think I know enough about it to kind of answer your question. Yeah, we went from 6-year reappraisal to 2-year reappraisal about 2 sessions ago. We chose to do that, and there was in statute a phase-in that governed what the property taxes would be between, years 0, 2, 4, and then 6 until they do a reappraisal. So there was essentially a formula that governed how we would come up with that market value. Now we just go out and get it. So yeah, that is taken into account, and we do it a little differently because we have the values every 2 years instead of having to use a statute phase-in. There was a formula with the 6-year. Now we have a reappraisal every 2 years so we can get the values.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Have you found more protested taxes and people having to hold on, or however that works, because of the 2-year?
Yeah, Chair Redfield, Representative Sheldon Galloway, I will ask Nick and we will get back to you. He'll know that.
Any further questions? All right. Thanks very much, Mr. Schaefer. We appreciate your updates. So this will start the hearing for House Bill 293. Representative Galt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Wiley Galt, House District 30, central part of Montana. I'll try to go through this quick with a 10,000-foot view to let the people behind me talk about the benefits of it. But on page 11 is mostly the meat of the bill, so that talks about the tax credit, how you get to the different numbers through it. And then I'll just quickly touch the fiscal note. I think a lot of this is just some disagreements we have between myself and the department. That they see with the transferable tax credits being a little new, that they don't quite know how it's going to react. So I'm hoping through some meetings that we will be able to find some amendments to make them feel better and bring that down. And with that, I will let the proponents and opponents.
Are there proponents for House Bill 293?
Mr. Chairman, I'm Senator Sue Malik from Missoula, and I come in support of this bill, HB293. First, I wanted to thank Bridget Smith, who brought a more modest bill last session and did a really good job with it. And of course, she came because one of the things she was concerned about was economic development in the Wolf Point area where she lives. And what is one of the most attractive things about this bill is it really will bring economic development to all parts of Montana. Yesterday in Senate Business and Labor, we listened to a young man talk about his farm near Manhattan, Montana, and that as the grain prices have gone down and the family has struggled, he and his two brothers developed a distillery, and now they're in 4 states and are doing well financially. So I've talked to an ag producer last night who talked about his ability to keep his farm going by being involved in the film industry. So you have to admire our ag community. And let me say that I also very much appreciate Representative Galt carrying this bill. Originally, when I got involved in it last summer, I put forward the bill request based on what Representative Smith had done last session, and I thought, well, I'll just sign it over to her, but we'll hear it early in the session. And then I started meeting some of the 1,500 people involved in filmmaking in Montana currently, and a lot of these people have either made huge investments or they're very young and they're struggling to survive. As our tax credits have disappeared in this state, the business has gone down and down and down until this past year was the worst they've ever had. And so as I listened to them, I appreciated their struggle. And then a Montana ambassador, and I don't know if you're familiar with them, but there are several people around the state who basically volunteer their time to promote Montana around the nation. And this young woman had gone to California and met a couple investors who want to come to Montana and build a studio here. So what that means for economic development, as you heard in this last presentation, we're facing some dire consequences in part of our economy that's been very important to Montana. So we expanded this bill, and we worked with those investors, and we talked about what that would mean to the state. So as you imagine, now, for instance, the movie Hidalgo, I share an office with Senator Weber from Browning, and if you look up that movie online, you will see, she told me she was trying to put a demonstration together to go across the reservation from the southern border to Canada. And that year, when the movie was being made in the Browning area, every horse on the reservation was engaged and paid, and rented by the film company. Many of the expert riders from the area were engaged, and the scene is absolutely gorgeous. The horses stampeding across the entire reservation, and the sun coming up over the Rocky Mountain front, and that vision of what we can display about Montana in films is absolutely breathtaking. But when we talk about a studio, we can talk about carpenters, plumbers, electricians going to work and building a set that appears in an empty studio to now be a neighborhood in New York City. And we can make a movie in Montana that puts to work blue-collar workers who are going to lose their jobs as a result of Colstrip, puts them to work in the Billings area in a studio that will make them proud of the work they do, building a city in a studio and seeing it come to life on film. So I want you to know that this bill, we're concerned about the fiscal note, and I appreciate Representative Galt is putting meetings together. We're going to be meeting with the Department of Revenue, and we expect that fiscal note to come down substantially. We don't believe that the industry will suddenly come and next summer invest $40 million in Montana, and the tax credits that you see in the bill will amount to $10 million suddenly in the first year. We expect over a period of 3 to 5 years that industry will begin to grow and that we will see substantial jobs and economic benefit to our state. If you look at other states like New Mexico, Louisiana, especially Georgia, the amount of money coming into the state is astounding. They are making money, even though they have tax credits. The state is making money and able to pay for public services as well. I think it's an exciting opportunity for our state. And again, I appreciate Representative Galt really digging into the details, and we'll make this fiscal note work. And I hope you have this vision for Montana. And remember, if we don't have a vision, nothing will ever happen. And we need to envision a new future for our state. So thank you very much. I'm going to leave because I know very little about the details. People know a lot more than I, and I have a bill up. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Senator. Next proponent.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak. My name is Julian Higgins. I'm a filmmaker, a director from Los Angeles. I'm here with my production designer, Callie. We were scouting. We put about 1,000 miles on the car in the last 2 days. A few years ago, in 2014, I made a short film here in Montana called Winter Light. It was based on a short story by James Lee Burke, celebrated local author. I'm sure you guys know him. It was a short film. It was a half-an-hour film, and we spent about $100,000 in Montana just on that film. We employed about a dozen Montanans. And the film, we received the support of the package that you guys had, the incentive package at that time. It was a grant and a small tax incentive. And the film did extremely well. It played at about 50 festivals around the world. We won about half of them. It was shortlisted. It was a top 10 finalist for the Academy Award for live action short. And honestly, the first question that I always get asked when I screen the film is, where was that shot? People are just, it's a real showcase for the state. And now I'm here location scouting to make the feature adaptation of that same story. And, if we were able to do this here, we would spend about 10 times at least the amount that we spent on the short. We would employ 30 to 40 Montana film professionals. And, I think it's a Montana story. It's by a Montana author. It's set in Montana. For me, I believe this is where we should shoot the film. And my job as a director and producer in LA is to try to pitch this as a project that a financier would want to, put money into. And the first question that I get asked by financiers is, do they have an incentive? It really is the first question. And, if this bill were to pass, it would be a no-brainer to shoot here. It would not be a problem for anybody. As it is, everyone is sort of saying, well, you're going to shoot in Alberta, And that's just the conversation that I have several times a week trying to get this movie made. And honestly, I do think it's sort of a quiet tragedy of American culture that so many of our stories that are told on film and in television that are set in the American West are shot in Canada or Romania or something crazy like that. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'm going to resume the scout. I'm trying to get to Lenape today. So thank you very much for this time. I'm going to take off. Thank you.
Thank you. Next proponent.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, good morning and thank you for the opportunity to speak as a proponent for House Bill 293. My name is Steve Grover and I'm from Missoula. I am the CEO of Montana Studios and a fifth-generation Montanan. I will do my best to be brief, but I believe this bill we are discussing today is the most significant economic development opportunity this state will see. So I ask your indulgence to allow me to back up this statement. My career has included several years as a CPA, which sadly means I actually understand the numbers in the bill and the related fiscal note, which I will discuss shortly. I also have spent over 10 years in economic development in Montana and was part of the team who brought new market tax credits to the state. So I've seen what a powerful economic development tool tax credits can be when they are understood and applied appropriately. I also am part of the team who helped draft this bill, and I can tell you hundreds of hours of research and editing have gone into creating this bill to make sure it is both competitive in the industry and at the same time very good for the economy of the state of Montana. Finally, I am a business owner and I represent a group of investors who have already spent 5 years and $250,000 on feasibility studies, engineering, and pre-development costs, and we are prepared to make a significant investment in the first media campus in Montana because we believe in the economic potential of this industry. I also ask you to bear with me as I am going to read most of my comments from my notes. I am still recovering as a CPA, which means speaking in front of a group of more than 2 people ranks right up there with a root canal. But this information is too important to let my nervousness get in the way of the facts. I would like to start by discussing this so-called fiscal note. If I were to refer to this note as a joke, it would be a very bad joke because it is at best misleading and actually quite deceptive. The note refers to the fact that House Bill 293 is modeled after the film tax credit program in Georgia, which is one of the most competitive in the country, and this is true. But that is where the truth of the note ends. To explain this further, let's take a deeper look at a little history of the media industry in 2 states. I apologize, I forgot to ask Vanessa, we have handouts. Unfortunately,
Go ahead.
we only had about half of them, so if you don't mind sharing, I'd appreciate it. As you receive the handouts, if you would turn to the second page, which is a graph that looks like this. This graph shows the direct spend in the film and TV industry in Georgia, Utah, and Montana from 2007 up to the most current data available. As you can see, in 2007, all 3 states offered some level of tax incentive in the industry. Georgia had $97 million in direct spend, Utah had $13.9 million, and Montana had $7.8 million. As I mentioned, all 3 states offered some level of tax incentive in the industry, with Georgia being the most competitive of the 3 at 20%. In 2007, Georgia lost the production of Ray, the biopic about Georgia native Ray Charles, to the state of Louisiana because Louisiana offered a more competitive incentive program. The governor and other officials of Georgia at the time lobbied for a more competitive incentive program, so losing a production that belonged in Georgia would not happen again. The new program had 3 key components. 1, the tax credit was increased from 20% to a potential 30%. 2, qualified spending caps were removed. And 3, the program did not have a predetermined end date or sunset. That's where you see the first jump in the graph in direct spend in the state of Georgia. As you can see, this graph had a significant impact on the direct spend in the state. In fact, the state's film incentive program is credited as the main reason why Georgia today has become one of the world's top production hubs over the past decade. As a result of the incentive and the related economic activity, Georgia now has over 2 million square feet of soundstage facilities, over 92,000 direct and indirect jobs, generating $4.6 billion in total wages last year. In 2010, Georgia only had 40,000 square feet of soundstage space and approximately 400 industry jobs. Not significantly different from where Montana could be today. The increased incentive was the catalyst that brought infrastructure investment and crew development to the state. So Georgia was prepared with open arms to welcome the industry that promptly exited North Carolina in 2014 when North Carolina allowed their competitive film tax credit incentive to sunset. As you can see at the top of the graph, last year Georgia had approximately $2.7 billion in direct spend by the media industry. Georgia's economists use a multiplier of 3.57 when determining the economic impact of the media industry to the state's economy. This means that 2.7 billion of direct spending resulted in almost 10 billion of economic impact in the state of Georgia. The Georgia line on this graph, represents what we call a hockey stick in the investment world, which is very good and also means that Georgia can expect this trend line to continue for the foreseeable future. The bottom two lines on the graph, that's Montana and Utah. And these bottom lines are what we refer to as flatline in the investment world, which means this trend will also continue unless a significant change is introduced to change the trend. That significant change for Montana is House Bill 293. I should note that Utah does offer a film tax credit of up to 25%. So why such a drastic difference in economic performance if there's only a 5% difference in the incentive? Well, Utah also has several caps on the qualified spend in their program, which are a significant disincentive to the industry. And yes, 5% does make a difference when you're talking about spending billions of dollars. Please keep these facts in mind when you evaluate the specifics of House Bill 293. Any changes you make to the bill that would reduce the competitiveness of the incentive in the industry will have a catastrophic impact on the economic effectiveness of this bill. So back to this fiscal note. As you can see, the fiscal note is projecting an amazing immediate change in the industry in Montana for fiscal year 2020, resulting in over 10 million of tax credits draining our state treasury, and a miraculous doubling of that amount of tax credits in just 4 years. If you refer to the Georgia graph, even though they already had infrastructure and a 20% incentive back in 2007, they saw nothing close to that kind of growth in the initial years after increasing their incentive. The numbers just don't add up. I can tell you that those of us in the industry look forward to the day when we see that kind of tax credit activity in the state, and you should too, because that would mean we would have $50 to $100 million of direct spend. Using Georgia's multiplier of 3.57 would mean we would see 178 million to 357 million of economic impact in the state, and probably will have solved most of our economic issues. However, if I was presenting these types of projections to you as a group of investors, I can assure you none of you would invest in my project because of my irrational exuberance I had in claiming we could go from where we are today with very little infrastructure, a talented but small professional crew, and approximately 10 million of direct spend to this amazing $50 to $100 million of direct spend that this fiscal note represents. This brings up the other major flaw in the fiscal note. Where is the tax revenue that would result from 178 million to 357 million of new economic activity that would have to occur in order to create this level of tax credits? Apparently, our state has some strange rule that says they can project all of the expenses that might possibly happen as a result of a new program, but they are not allowed to project the corresponding income. I'm not sure how or who came up with that rule, but this bill is too important to not understand the truth of the economics and how this tax credit would actually work. Please refer to the second handout that was provided so we can get a little better understanding. Thank you, Chris Cronin, for taking time to prepare this great graphic. As you can see, a production company will first have to go through a qualification process with the Department of Commerce to ensure their project meets the criteria to qualify for a potential tax credit. Next, the production company will have to spend all the project money in the state, creating jobs, and spending money on building materials, food, lodging, equipment, stage rental, location fees, etc., and then prove all of this money was spent on qualifying expenditures before the state issues the corresponding tax credit. The state will have already collected all of the income and other taxes associated with the direct and follow-on expenditures related to the production investment. Please understand this is a tax credit. The state will never write a check associated with this tax credit. In order for a tax credit to be used, a company first has to make a profit and a corresponding tax liability to the state. In the early years, all of this money is being spent by production companies who most likely are not based in Montana. So this is all new money flowing into the state's economy. And the production company is spending money in the state, not generating profits. This is why it is critical that the production company has the ability to sell or transfer this tax credit to another Montana company or individual who does have a tax liability, or the tax credit has very little value to the production company. As a result of this process, states who have transferable tax credits very rarely see the full cost of the tax credit impacting the Treasury. This brings up another misunderstanding of tax credits and the claim that they have a cost to the state of any revenue. What a tax credit actually does is create the most efficient deployment of tax dollars to stimulate the economy. Let me explain. This buyer or user of the tax credit has a tax liability to the state. Now they could pay that tax bill to the state, and the tax revenue could get spread out to all the various unknown places that our tax dollars go. I think you get my point. Instead, these same tax dollars are directly invested in a project or program that we're able to track the real economic impact resulting from that investment. To me, this is the most efficient use of any tax dollars that the state chooses to spend on economic development. I've taken a lot of your time, and I appreciate your sticking with me through this education. Hopefully you all have a better understanding of the potential economic impact this bill can have, and why I stated at the beginning that this is the most significant economic development opportunity the state will see. Let me wrap up by sharing this, why now is the time to take action. Paramount's production Yellowstone has completed shooting season 2 and will start shooting season 3 this spring. The estimated budget for each season is approximately $70 million. Of that, $1 to $2 million is currently being spent in Montana. The rest is spent on production in Utah, because Utah currently offers a 25% tax incentive, and according to the Paramount bean counters, Utah looks like Montana. Yellowstone was one of the top TV series for season 1 and has the potential to be a 5 to 10 year series. As Kevin Costner told Governor Bullock last year, the industry is sending another love letter to the state of Montana, saying we love your locations, we love your people and your quality of life, and we would love to spend millions of dollars here actually producing films. Just show us a little love by offering a competitive incentive so our bean counters will let us do it. As you're going to hear, there are many other productions, and as you heard in the initial proponent, that want to come and produce here. Number 2, we have investors ready to spend millions of dollars investing in the first stages of infrastructure on both sides of the state. But we can't invest in buildings that will sit empty because productions can't afford to spend their money here. We're going to invest in this industry. The only question is, will we make that investment in the state of Montana? Number 3, we must take action to create incentives, create and incentivize good-paying jobs for current and future generations if we want to keep our best. Instead of educating them, instilling good values, work ethic, the things that we're known for in Montana, and then giving them away to other states. Thank you for your time. I will be available 24/7 from now until this bill passes to answer your questions. If I don't have an answer, I'll work until I find it. Let's do something great for the state of Montana. Thank you.
Thank you. Next proponent.
Good morning, Chairman Redfield, and good morning, representatives. My name is J.P. Gabriel, Gabriel. I've done this before over probably about 10 sessions. I've been coming up here hat in hand, trying to get the film industry a break. I own a company called Film Lights Montana. It's over in Bozeman. It has a substantial amount of grip lighting, camera cranes, cameras, probably $5-6 million of equipment that I have spent over the years. We're coming up on our 30th year. Been hanging in there, scratching out a living, trying to do this with no film incentive lately. I just wanted to give you some sense of the history. We had a great time from when I first started Film Lights, 1989. up until about the year 2000. It was a boom time as it continued to grow and grow. It was prior to the film incentives, with the exception of Canada. Canada had film incentives pretty early on. But there was not a lot of state film incentives, and so everything was kind of a balanced field. It changed. As time went on, Canada got more aggressive, so we lost a lot of Legends of the Fall, stories that were Montana stories ended up being shot up in Calgary. And as time has gone on, the aggressiveness of 40 other states have film incentives. Now, we're one of the 10 that don't. I mean, what is wrong with us? We need to get in the game. And so once we lost the tax credit that sunsetted, I mean, we saw a real dip into the level of production that would happen, and then also the budgets of movies or any kind of short stories that we were going to shoot here. And so that happened in terms of they would look at the film incentive or the film little grant that we had, a little grant program after the Big Sky and Big Screen Act went away, and they would be a little, $500,000 movie, $1 million movie. We were able to just kind of throw the kitchen sink at them, and they wanted the location so bad that they would hang in here and they would do it. Now we have, literally last year, we had no incentives to offer. I saw a complete wipeout of even the small movies. We are involved. We've done probably 40 motion pictures in some capacity at Film Lights. And last year, it just went dry. And if you can try to understand the frustration of someone like me that has been sitting here trying to make this work, and we see this series end up coming into the Hamilton area. So they come in, they find this perfect house that they want is this ranch house. They said, we're going to shoot this. This is just perfect. We're coming to Montana to shoot this. The producers don't want that to happen. I mean, they're not going to get any tax credit to be able to be there. But it was so insurmountable for them not to have that they decided, okay, we're going to come up to Montana. So they come up here, they'll do a scene. They have $17 million. This is at the beginning. They had $17 million per episode. And they spent $1 million in Montana for that first season. And they went up. I live in Bozeman. They go over to Paradise Valley. They shoot the wides so that they have the Paradise Valley shots. They go over to the courthouse here. They shot some exterior shots. They went over, and then the rest of it, they would try to stay tight on the ranch house. But all this other stuff is in Park City and around the Wasatch Front. And so I'm sitting there with all this equipment sitting in a warehouse that we could just drive over there and do this. And they called me, but I have nothing to offer them because they not only want the low prices that they're garnering out of Los Angeles equipment that's coming up along with Utah equipment. Utah is subsidizing them to come here and shoot. It is the most bizarro world ever. I mean, I don't know if the citizens of Utah know that, but that's what's happening. And they end up, I sit there and basically they called for a few little items, which I call the stems and seeds of the rental equipment, and sandbags and C-stands and some things that are just not much money tied to it. And then they went away, they came back, and it's even less. And so they're cutting back to about 11 million and then back to about 8 million per episode. And so there's just, less investment in Montana, but still it's this whole Montana story, this whole kind of, I wouldn't say, I mean, it's a pretty exaggerated story of the West, let's just say that. And it's just a shame that these Lewis and Clark, the HBO movie series, came to Film Lights and scouted my equipment and the place 3 times with 3 different directors as it got sold from production company to production company, all absolutely swearing on a Bible to me that they're coming to Montana to shoot this thing. And I think it was 3 years ago, they called and said, yeah, we're going to shoot in Canada. You know, that thing was, it had come up here 15 years of scouting with promises, and they ended up going to Canada. So those are the heartbreaking stories of us not being competitive. So I'm just going to wrap that up. The fiscal note, I think they pretty much covered that. I just wanted to add one other element to that, is that just the nature of production, they have to kind of come up here. They got to figure out their infrastructure, their crew base, how much they're going to shoot inside. They're scouting on all these locations. That alone takes a year of any sizable motion picture. So the fact that the fiscal note just jumps us into 10 million is just kind of preposterous in the actual reality of filmmaking. So not only did it not really track, but it actually, especially for this industry, it doesn't track. So I'm hoping that, and I wanted to thank Representative Galt for really doing us a very big service by sponsoring this bill. And we can't appreciate it more. So I'm just going to say, but once again, if you have any questions about Montana production, anytime. Thank you.
Next proponent.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Christopher Cronin. I live in Missoula County, and I've lived there since 1990. I arrived from New York City in pursuit of a young woman who was born and raised in those precincts. And she informed me that she would not going to live in New York City or Los Angeles. Been in the film business since 1975. I'm a line producer and production manager, and I've worked on a number of significant films in that time. I'm here as a proponent of the bill. You've heard a lot from the 2 or 3 speakers who have preceded me. I don't want to cover the same ground. I would like to make just a few brief points. My experience in the film industry has led me to meet a number of fools. Another name for those fools is risk takers. Investing in motion picture production is a high-risk business. It's very capital intensive. It takes a lot of money. There's no guarantee that you're going to get your money back at the end of the road. And so the producers, these risk takers, try and lay off some of that risk. And they go shopping in the 40 states that have tax incentives and the various foreign countries that have tax incentives, looking for deals that will mitigate some of what they're going to risk. This bill, I believe, is a very good mechanism for those risk takers to be enticed to come to this state to spend their money. My job as a line producer and production manager is to spend their money, to hire crews, find locations, arrange for the catering, rent the equipment, buy the wardrobe, buy the props, buy the set dressing, buy the lumber, buy the hardware. There's a lot of money. If you look at that handout, one of those handouts, that is a budget that I did. See, there's my bride from Missoula.
Well, you're supposed to silence your cell phone, so you're going to have to buy the committee a set of or some breakfast burritos.
I didn't get that, but okay. That's a representation. That's a pie chart that represents a budget that I did for a film that would like to shoot here this summer in the Whitefish area near Glacier National Park. It's a $13 million budget, 13.7. of which I calculate about over $8 million would be spent in qualifying spend that would entitle us to some sort of tax credit, which we could lay off to other taxpayers and recoup some of our costs. When we went to visit, I went with the director, went to Los Angeles to speak to investors. The first question out of their mouths was, we're looking for soft money, meaning tax credits. Second thing they would say when we said that Montana didn't really have one, though we were working on it, second thing they would say was, well, Canada. The third thing they would say was Romania. I don't want to make this film, which was written for, takes place in Glacier National Park. I don't want to shoot it in Bucharest. So that is the kind of Horn's dilemma that people like myself are on. We want to shoot something where it should be shot, but for financial reasons, we're forced to go to some other place. About the bill itself, I think it's important to understand that the bill is actually priming a pump for a new industry in the state of Montana. The industry as it exists right now is pretty moribund. We really don't have much activity, as you've already heard. By priming the pump, by offering tax credits, we increase tax flow, we increase expenditures in Montana, we increase tax collections, and that the tax credits should be completely covered by new taxes, which will be generated by our spending of money. I think that's really all I've got to say. I'm really in support of this bill. I've lived here since 1990. I've made one picture in those 29 years I've made in the state of Montana. I've been to California, Florida. I did a lot of films in New York, Connecticut, South Dakota, Pennsylvania. I've been all around the country. One picture for $1,400,000 in 1999. That's the only work I've done in this state. I'd love to do a hell of a lot more. Thank you.
Thank you. Next proponent.
Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's wearing their wool socks. I know I am. My name's Tyler Gruch. I'm with the Montana Film Society. That's
Okay.
TYLERGRUTSCH. We're a professional development group for all the skilled labor across the state working in television and film. I was born and raised in Missoula, educated there, University of Montana. Been working for about 10 years in the industry here in Montana. Just pretty much scrapping to stay here to be able to raise my family and do the work that I love to do. I would love to expand, hire more people, but the problem is there's just not enough work here for me to do that. So I can hire people when I do, but you know, right now we're a tiny amount of work that's going on, and we need to do something to attract more of it. And I'm here to help answer any questions about production, about the process. It's a manufacturing business. That's how it's classified. They come in here, they spend a whole lot of money renting hotels, renting cars, feeding people, buying gas, buying lumber, and then they leave. That's the best part. So they come in, they spend their money, and we just want to offer an incentive or a coupon or a loss leader or whatever you want to call it for them to come here, spend their money, showcase to all the tourists around the world how beautiful Montana is, and then leave. And in doing so, sure, we'll give them a tax credit to do so. Another thing I'd like to point out is that this industry is a lot more blue collar than you think it is. You know, truck drivers, horse wranglers, construction. It's all over. It touches so many jobs and so many careers. And, you know, earlier in the committee we were mentioning coal strip might be going away or is going away. let's put all those people to work in the film industry. And that's not, an outrageous statement. That's an easy segue and transition to those lost jobs, is putting them in the television and film market. So, let's build something for the future. Let's think about this 10, 20 years from now when, those blue collar jobs might be drying up or changing or transitioning. Entertainment's a measurable export of this country. Every single person in this room watches TV or watches movies. It's a universal, industry that everyone consumes. Let's bring it to Montana. And if you guys have any questions about production or how it works or how people spend money or anything like that, feel free to give me a call, shoot me an email. I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next proponent.
Hi, thank you, Chairperson and representatives. My name is Linwood Fields, and I am a filmmaker in Montana. I was in here in the beginning when you were going over the budget, and when we talked about Colstrip, it made me feel something in my heart, because even though we're looking at numbers, we're talking about Montana workers and how that impacts families. And it makes me think about my father. When I was growing up in Libby, he was a logger and he lost his job. And then he had to scramble, and he sold Christmas trees for a while. And when I think about numbers and I think about jobs, I think about families. And eventually my father moved to Whitefish and became a builder. And one thing he really instilled in me was that you have to keep looking, and you have to keep working, and you have to have a vision. And when I think about filmmaking in Montana, that is a vision of business and economy growth here. And I will tell you that I am one of the few filmmakers that graduated from Missoula who stayed here. And there's a few of us here. And we are trying to make a living and support our families. And I cannot tell you what an amazing business this is. And I am working on a project, I've been working on it for 7 years, called Perma Red. And it is a film that's based off Deborah Magpie Erling's book about a Salish woman in the 1940s during assimilation, trying to survive against missing and murdered Indigenous women. This is a powerful project. We are at this really crucial and beautiful point where we have some networks that are looking at picking this up. This project cannot be filmed off the Flathead Reservation. I have promised the Salish people that we will film in Montana, and the biggest reason for that is that Montana is a character in this book. And so when we talk about this incentive, we're actually talking bigger than numbers. We're talking about changing lives in a big way. And I can employ many people on the reservation with this project. I can employ many Indigenous people creating the costuming that we need. We can use them to stunt ride. We can use them as actual extras. This is an economy boost in places that normally don't see that. And it could be an economy boost all through Montana. And a few of my colleagues have talked a little bit about the blue collar element of this. That is no joke. If my dad had lost his job, we could scoop him right up. We can scoop up these miners. We can scoop up loggers. We can scoop up truck drivers. And I'm not talking about like little jobs. These are really high paying good jobs in Montana. And as a mom and as a filmmaker, we need to push this industry so that we can support our families and keep our people who graduate. There's no doubt that Montana filmmakers and Montanans in general are hardworking, smart people, and we need to keep them here, and we won't be able to do it if we don't have a tax incentive. So I really appreciate all of you looking at this and pushing this forward, because this could really change the economy of Montana and keep our youth here and really build a strong economy. The last thing I want to just end with is I have a lot of friends in Georgia who do filmmaking. And 10 years ago, they decided to stay like we have stayed. And then their Republican governor pushed this bill. And partially because they didn't get their film made, but also because it was a bipartisan effort to really boost their economy. And this year, he's able to stand up in front of everybody and brag about $10 billion. And my friend who's been there now, he has a nice house. He can provide for his family. And he goes into these small rural communities, and in one shoot, they can get months worth of rent paid. I mean, they're changing lives. This isn't just like a business. They're literally giving people their month's worth of rent in a couple days of shooting. So thank you for looking at this. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Next proponent.
Hi, my name is Troy Bertelsen, Bertelsen. We call ourselves distant cousins of Werner Bertelsen, if you remember him from the legislature years ago. I was born in a faraway land called North Dakota and raised here in Helena. I've spent my life either working in the film business or working in the gym business. I've owned 3 gyms in Montana, and so far nothing has compared to my work in the film business for being able to support my family, raise my kids, and the effect of the film bill not being in place, I had no idea until we were talking about this proposed film bill. That normally I work as an assistant director on TV commercials, which is, you've been hearing a lot about feature films, but TV commercials are a huge business. Like JP said, we had a huge national TV commercial business back in 2000. We had 40 national TV commercials shot here. Last year there was 1. It's quite a drop. For me, I go to work periodically and come back home to my family and help take care of the kids, get them to school and all that. I've got a 20-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 14-year-old. And I have a 35-year-old from my previous marriage who lives up in Whitefish. All of my kids have gotten to work with me in the film business. They've either been on as actors, extras, or on the crew. One thing we do have going for us in Montana is we have a work ethic that is recognized around the country. We can go to work like nobody's business. So when people come here and they see how we work together, and they see how my kids work and my friends' kids work, they could just go, wow, you guys really have something going here in Montana. We would recommend your crew to anybody in any other part of the country. So we really have something here in Montana. Coming from the farm in North Dakota, I now have 1 cousin who has no kids, farming all the land that used to support 6 families. The way industrial farming has been going and the way things are going in Montana with the bigger ranches getting bought out by outside interests, and we have ranch managers, there's not much of a family legacy being passed down anymore. I almost guarantee you that if you pass this film bill, you will start a new family farm of the 21st century where families can grow up working in this business, passing on businesses to their kids. And not everybody's in front of the camera. When you're in front of the camera and you turn around and look at how many people are behind the camera, that's the scariest part about being an actor, is how many crew there are standing there watching you do your job. And on the other side, as I'm crew, I always have a lot of respect for people who come here and like they said, they come here, they spend boatloads of money, and then they go home. And we get to stay here. So, and I would like to recognize that this is the first year I've seen such phenomenal bipartisan support for a film bill in Montana. I got to visit with a lot of Republican colleagues last night who were on board, and I was really, really proud of that. I mean, I'm a Republican from day one, growing up in North Dakota and Montana, and it's awesome to see. Like, it seems like it's stepping out on a limb, but I don't believe that it is. The way it's set up, they explained the numbers on it, and I just want you to know that, like we're talking about families and wages in Montana, it could really be a turnaround for Montana, and it can be an industry that can support your kids and your grandkids to be able to stay here. And I'm available for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next proponent.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Bridger Malum, M-A-H-L-U-M, Montana Chamber of Commerce. We too rise in support of House Bill 293. We do try to be selective when rising in support of tax credits, but you've heard some compelling testimony from folks in the industry already, but we just feel that this is an economic development opportunity from pre-production to post-production and even long after that could benefit businesses that aren't even directly related to the film industry itself. And so we feel that could benefit the state with the inclusion of this incentive. So we urge it to pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Next proponent.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Jesse Luther, last name is Luther, on behalf of the Motion Picture Association of America. We also rise in strong support of House Bill 293. We think that this is a much more competitive tax credit than the one that previously existed in law and then sunsetted. We think that it will continue to stimulate Montana's economy, both with the people that come in and spend their money and the local folks, as you've heard from all of the Montana filmmakers behind me. Currently, 32 other states and more than 20 foreign jurisdictions have some sort of film tax credit. And so, as you've heard, there's a competition amongst these different jurisdictions with their film tax credits on what can be competitive. And people want to come to Montana, but when you have individuals making financial decisions and there's no sort of incentive, it makes it really difficult for them to make those decisions. So we, again, rise in strong support. I did want to note I have been working with the sponsor. We have a very minor cleanup amendment to the bill. There was a reference to MPAA ratings in the bill, and we have worked an amendment to remove that reference to those ratings and refer to an existing section of Montana code. Instead, the MPAA ratings are voluntary ratings that the industry complies with, and because they are voluntary, we didn't want to have anything codified that would require compliance with those voluntary standards. So with that amendment, we are in strong support and encourage your support as well. Thank you.
Further proponents?
Mr. Chair, members, for the record, Drew Geiger, GEI-GER, representing the Montana Car Rental Association. Increased film obviously increases rental of our vehicles, but we mainly wanted to point out it is not included in the fiscal note, and to give the fiscal note a little love, I think purposely and correct, there is a 4% tax on car rentals, as this committee knows, 25% of which goes under Title VII to special needs transportation, the rest going to the general fund. We as an association have no staff, we have no data to be able to say this number of vehicles, thus this number of general fund revenue increase, but this bill would increase it and would recommend it be included in your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you. Next proponent.
Chairman Redfield, members of the committee, my name is Charlotte Lauerman, Lauerman. I'm with the Montana Lodging and Hospitality Association, and we represent around 200 hotels around the state of Montana. We rise in support of this bill. When these productions come to the state, the people involved stay in our hotels, eat at our restaurants, shop at our stores, and hire our residents. In addition, productions filmed in Montana provide promotion and awareness of our state, which can generate even more visitors spending money in Montana. This film tax credit will provide an incentive to get these productions filmed in our state, which contribute to one of our largest industries, which is tourism. Thank you.
Thank you. Further proponents? Further proponents? Are there opponents?
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name's Gene Walborn, W-A-L-B-O-R-N. I'm the director of the Department of Revenue. I kind of feel like I'm a tweener a little bit in testimony. The executive, the governor, we do support reestablishing some type of film credit. Our opposition comes into with this bill is making sure it's something that fiscally we can manage in the short term, in the long run. So we're very willing, and we want to work with the sponsor and others to try to get the bill to a point that everyone's comfortable with. So with that, that's kind of where we're headed. But unfortunately, I wasn't going to do this, but based on the testimony of the proponents about the fiscal note, I do take exception to their comments. A lot of people put a lot of hard work into fiscal notes for all of you and all of us. One bill we heard yesterday, we are spent hundreds of hours working on a fiscal note for that bill. We use the best information we have available to do fiscal notes. This one specifically, I asked some of the proponents and investors that are coming to Montana, first year, what are you going to spend in Montana? They told me. Second year, what are you going to spend in Montana? they told me. Those numbers aren't too far off from, if you did the math, of what this fiscal note comes up with. Now, maybe, in all due respect to the folks I talked to, maybe they didn't understand my question, maybe I didn't understand their response. But if I did, the fiscal note's pretty close. Now, with all that said, I really am anxious, and we're happy to work with Representative Galt and Senator Malik to work something out, but I do have to take exception to the comments about the fiscal note. Thank you.
Thank you. Further opponents?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Patrick Webb, WEBB with Americans for Prosperity, Montana. At Americans for Prosperity, we agree with cutting taxes, just not for a particular industry. We don't believe it is the role of government to box out a certain industry for a benefit like this, regardless of the industry. We would prefer a low, broad base of taxation that is neutral to the industry. Another concern of ours is that tax credits tend to be taken advantage of by large corporations, not small businesses. This is largely because larger companies tend to have the accounting firms capable of navigating them. We believe that even with the greater restrictions in place in the program, this will still overwhelmingly benefit large Hollywood corporations, not Montana businesses. Again, we disagree with the means here, but we do not disagree with the value of lower taxes. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Thank you. Next opponent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob Story, Montana Taxpayers Association. I have a couple handouts if I could.
Go ahead.
Distribute them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Montana Taxpayers rises, Madam Vice
Continue,
Chairman.
please.
Rises in opposition to the bill, not because of the concept of it. I think this, I've sat through a lot of presentations on this concept, and this is probably the best one I've heard, and it helped to bring a numbers person in to talk about the bill and explain what the bill is intended to do. So I think the proponents have made a good case. I just distribute two pieces of information for you to look at. That one is an article that came out a couple years ago out of California, referencing a study that was done there about tax credits in the film industry and whether they're beneficial or not. And you can read that and take it for what it is. But they draw a conclusion that a lot of tax credits are just out there, and people have gotten on that bandwagon, and there's not a lot of follow-up to prove that they really work. But the second one kind of disputes that, because it basically tells you that, as you heard, this film credit is a lot of talk about the Georgia experience with film tax credits. And they started out with a lower number, and they've eventually, as the fiscal note says, gotten up to where they're issuing about $275 million a year in tax credits. And that caused some consternation in California, because they thought they were losing a lot of business to other states that had a more attractive tax credit program. And so California just recently extended theirs out and have committed $300 million a year to their tax credit program. And so Montana's working with $10 million. That will be helpful to some things, but you're playing in the big leagues when you get into the tax credits in the film industry. I just want to talk a little bit about the bill. I don't think anybody's really gone through and explained the bill. That would have been helpful. It appears to me that the state's going to be a partner for about 20% of the cost of a production under this bill, up to 35%, depending on how much of the ancillary things. If you go to page 11 of the bill, it kind of lays that out. 20% of the production costs not to exceed 35% if you meet some of the things down below that have to do with percentages of salaries and those types of things. So I think you need to understand that. I think many of the states have capped their state exposure. I don't think this bill does that. You know, you might want to look at that. So anyway, I think you've got to, you know, how the state wants to promote economic development. If this is the way the legislature decides to go, I think you just need to spend with the sponsor a little time on fleshing it out and seeing if you want to look at how much commitment the state is making here, if it's open-ended or if it has a cap on it. You know, how big that expenditure is, because again, you know, you've heard, well, they'll go to Canada. Well, a lot of the reason for going to Canada is exchange rate as much as tax credits. You know, if the Canadian dollar isn't worth much, you can do a lot more up there. So there's a lot of things playing in this. I'm sure tax credits are important, but I just hope that you weigh carefully whether that's where Montana wants to go.
Thank you. Next opponent. Their opponents. Informational witnesses. Questions from the committee. Representative Brown.
Mr. Chair, for Mr. Story. Mr. Chair, Mr. Story, do you think...
Just a minute. He can't. He's not
I can hear you, but I don't think people on the... you're not coming through your mic very good, Rip.
Oh, got it. Thank you. Mr. Chair, Mr. Story, I guess my curiosity is either from your perspective as an individual or the Montana Taxpayers Association, do you think that there's a larger story to tell, or a larger logic that we could apply to your opposition to other types of tax incentives that states or communities try and offer to lure businesses, big corporations, industries to come in? I mean, there's lots of carve-outs in our tax code, and lots of gamesmanship between communities and states, kind of, in some cases, I think it could be characterized as a race to the bottom. But I mean, would you sort of give your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Brown, to the best I can. I mean, there are, as you saw in the bill here earlier, the amount of credits out there to either incentivize different behaviors. A lot of states have those. You heard the discussion today about how many states already have a tax credit, and why doesn't Montana? And one of those articles talks about, yeah, well, a lot of states have them because if 20 other states have them, they must be doing something right, so why don't we do this? You know, the problem with all tax credits is that there's no follow-up and analysis to see if they're doing what they're intended to do. I mean, it takes time. You have to put them in place for a period of time to look at them, but then you have to have the courage and the strength to go back and say, is this incentive doing what we intended it to do? Is it bringing jobs? Is it driving the kind of economy that it was asked for? Or is it just a tax break for someone who probably was going to do what they're going to do anyway?
Mr. Chair, follow up. So I guess, and thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. Is there a broader, from the Montana Taxpayers Association's perspective, a broader application of that idea to other industries that may have carve-outs in the tax code currently?
Well, Mr. Chairman and Representative Brown, I think, you know, we could discuss that. I just hate to get off the bill and start down those roads.
Fair enough. Mr. Chair, one more question for Mr. Walborn, please.
Mr. Chair, Vice Chair Brown.
Mr. Chair, Director Walborn, could you give the committee a sense of maybe what's changed over the last 6 years? So this is my third term on this committee and third session in a row where we've seen this bill. And the first session in 2015, it was a Department of Commerce agency bill that was kind of a governor priority. So that the partisanship piece is not really on the table from my point of view, because it's gone both ways, and opponents and proponents from both sides, it seems. But what is different about this bill or this moment in time that has caused concern from your point of view or from the governor's point of view?
Mr. Chair and Vice Chair Brown, I'm only going to speak from my point of view. Governor can take care of himself, which he does very well. I think all along it's just the sense of the bill. So the first bill we had was pretty limited. You know, there wasn't a lot of credits. This bill, or ability to how you calculated the credit, was a lot lower. And I think over the 10-year period, Montana, we issued about $390,000 in credits. So it wasn't much. I don't think that program was probably the best program to incentivize film production here. But I think it also came into the timing of where we're at financially as a state and what can we afford and what can we not afford. So I think that some of those decisions went into not renewing the prior film credit. I think now that this has come up again, there's been more conversations about the benefit of the film program, what we can do. I think there's an interest of continuing those for the economic development. I think all of us are all pro business. We all want business to come to Montana and have good jobs for Montanans. So I think this is an opportunity to take a look at an industry to do that. Again, I think it just comes from our side of the ledger. I think it just comes down to what can we afford and what can we make work. But I do agree with Mr. Story that maybe at some point we put something in, and maybe some of the bench, there's some thresholds on return on investment and that kind of thing, that if not in the bill, that's something that we do in each interim just to take a look at, is it doing what we want to do? So Mr. Chair and Vice Chair Brown, that's kind of a long rambling answer of why I think we're somewhat okay with this.
Representative Kirk Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question for the sponsor.
Mr. Chairman, Representative.
Mr. Chair, Representative Galt, feel free to redirect this. I don't know. There might be somebody else in the room that's more qualified to answer this. I'm just curious. People were saying that there are 40 other states that have a tax credit for, the film industry. And I'm just wondering how, and it sounds like this is modeled after Georgia's tax credit. I guess if we're competing against 40 other states, how is this particular package of film credits going to set us ahead of 40 other states and attract film business to Montana? Like, what makes this unique?
Mr. Chair and Representative, well, my personal view is, have you looked outside? That's basically where I come from. We do kind of one-up Georgia on this a little bit. So we would be at the top there, but we have the mountains and the plains and rivers that, no one else does. I think we should be taking advantage of those, and this is a great way to do it.
Representative Fern.
Question for the sponsor.
Mr. Chair and Representative.
Mr. Chair, Representative Galt, we've heard a suggestion that maybe, I think it came from Mr. Story, that maybe the fiscal note needs to be looked at, and possibly we could cap maybe expenditures. Have you thought about that? And talk a little bit about your thoughts on possibilities of maybe finding methods to adjust a fiscal note.
Mr. Chair and Representative, there's lots of different thoughts and stuff that we're talking about, and over the next day or two, it's going to be sitting down and talking between myself, industry, the departments, to just figure out what we can do to make it work, but yet, limit that fiscal note down a little bit to make this so that everyone can get behind it and, get movies back in Montana.
Representative Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for the sponsor, please.
Mr. Chair, Vice Chair.
Mr. Chair, Representative Galt, in looking at the language of your title, requiring an application and fee for the production, and then hearing from some of the proponents earlier, alluding to the fact that Montana is in itself one of the stars of the productions, right up to the point where Ms. Fields said Montana is a character in the movie. Is there any possibility of exploring, perhaps, some kind of royalties on some of these productions that gain a lot of notoriety?
Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, I would think that would be the tourism that we have following it. I don't know if you've looked on page 11, said one of the little bonuses is there's going to be a little Made in Montana sticker at the end, and they get a little bit more of a percentage off of that.
Other questions? Representative Hertz.
Mr. Chair, question for Director Walburn.
Director Walburn.
Director Walburn.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, had another conversation going.
Mr. Chair, Director Walburn. First, I want to, fiscal notes are difficult around here, and it gets frustrating at times. And, I know your department has constraints at times on what we can do with them. And I did, go through the fiscal note and looked at it. And I was just, and the information that was presented today, comparing Georgia to Montana, and I kind of went through and calculated some growth that potentially might happen as Georgia amped up their credits and as Montana would amp up their credits. And just, my calculations would put the fiscal note maybe more at $3.5 million the first year. I don't know if there's anything that you heard today that might lend you to think that maybe, the assumptions that you use in your fiscal note could possibly be adjusted with some of the more information that we got here today.
Mr. Chair and Mr. Speaker, sure, I think every time I come up to go to a hearing and, we start talking about the fiscal note and we hear about it in any bill, it's like, oh yeah, maybe we could have done that a little bit different, or we should have thought about that. So yes, again, once we work with the sponsor and Senator Malik, and I'm anticipating some amendments to the bill, we'll probably do a new fiscal note. Yeah. I don't know how that will change the fiscal note, but yeah, we'll take a look at that.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Representative Sheldon Galloway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for on this chart, and I believe it is Tyler Gooch. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
Chris actually made the chart, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Maybe Chris would be fine then. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And is it Cronin?
Cronin.
Mr. Cronin?
Correct.
Thank you, Mr.
C-R-O-N-Y-N.
I'm curious about the labor that's on this chart. Of the $3,900,000, do you have a percentage that is required union workers and a percentage that could be someone who's not union?
When I did that budget, I made the assumption that it would be a union production. There is a union local in Montana that represents, it's part of a national union called the IATSE, International Alliance of Theatrical and Stage Employees. They have units around the country. Obviously, the main units are in Los Angeles. There's also a major one in New York and the other production centers, but there is one here. I made that assumption because as a line producer, I generally would prefer to hire union workers, not because they're union, because that they are the experienced people, the people that know how to do what it is that I ask them to do. But that doesn't mean that I couldn't or wouldn't employ non-union workers if I felt they were qualified. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure that I completely understood the question, but
follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have family members that are part of that union, is kind of the reason I asked that. But when you bring in the out-of-state labor workers on this chart, are they also then required to be union on here also, or can they be non-union?
they would be required to be union if the production company signed a union contract. Or at least they would have to be paid as a union member was paid, whether or not they were actually a member of that bargaining unit. Once the production company had entered into a contract with the union, then you have to pay anybody who was a covered worker, or all covered work would have to be paid at union rates based on the individual skill of the worker.
Yeah. And I have one more question.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then when we go to the term Montana goods and services, I own a hardware lumber store and would love to be part of this too. Is a Montana good something that I just sell out of my store, or is it something that went from, like, I'll do lumber, the tree was cut down in Montana, the wood was cut in Montana, the wood's from Montana?
Well, as a production manager, I don't believe I've ever bought a tree. But I'm not sure. I've bought a lot of stuff. Usually, yes, it's usually retail goods. It's the stuff that you use to create the film, either in front of the lens, it's part of the scenery, it's part of the wardrobe, it's part of the makeup, it's whatever you purchase, whether it's something that you buy retail or it's something you buy the use of in terms of a service or a location. For instance, if you have a ranch, or if you have a commercial building, or if you have a private home, and the location scout comes knocking and says, would you be interested? That is the goods and services that I was referring to in that chart. Anything that I spend money on that is other than wage or salaried labor.
Thank you.
Representative Knudsen.
Mr. Chair, I would like a question, I think, for the sponsor, and then if he needs to defer, that would be okay.
Mr. Chairman, Representative.
Mr. Chair, Representative Galt, we heard from, I know nothing about the film industry, so let me preface my question with that. We heard lots of good information. The one thing that stood out to me is we are one of 10 states without tax credits. And then I heard another individual say that different states are raising their tax credits. Is this going to be a competition?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, well, if you believe in the rules of economics for competition, I mean, ceteris paribus, yeah.
Follow up?
Follow up.
Will we need to be ever increasing the tax credit amount to stay in competition?
Mr. Chair, Representative, at some point there's going to be a return on investment where it's not worth doing it anymore. And, it's either that or the film industry just doesn't get taxed anymore, which I don't see that going that route.
Okay, thank you.
Are there further questions? Seeing none, would the sponsor like to close?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, for the long hearing, but I feel like we got to see, all of the facets of this state that, the movie industry can touch when it comes in. I know lots of you have heard or from small towns that have had these movies come in that how, for one is Lewistown now 20 years after Broken Arrow. They're still talking about all of that up there. I would like to think that they left, but for those who don't know the state very well, Lenup is a suburb of Martinsdale. I actually went to school there in one-room schoolhouse till 6th grade. I'd also like to thank the director for the hard work, and through that, I think that it shows that with the people he called and the money they say they're going to spend there, how effective this can be. If that they're already looking at, if this passes, we're willing to spend the, up to $100 million in Montana very quickly. So with that, thank you for the great hearing, and we'll have some fun in executive action, I assure.
Thank you. This is a hearing on House Bill 293. People, we're going to do a bunch of executive action tomorrow. I gave you the list. If you have an amendment or whatever you need to get to, Ms. Moore, please get it done. We'll be in at 9. So this, Representative Brown.
Mr. Chair, Democrats are just going to circle up in the basement after the meeting.
This will be tomorrow. We do that.
I know, but today. Okay. Just reminding folks. Thank you.
Right. So, House tax is adjourned.